But life will invariably and inevitably set us back at some point. And the question is, how do you respond to it? Can you be resilient? Can you put together an intelligent game plan? Can you find a relationship with a higher power that can help you with it?
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Rise and Grind. I'm Thurl Bailey, your host. And on this show, we talk a lot about the journey, the grind, what it takes to build something meaningful. But what we don't always talk about, at least not enough, is what happens when it all goes away. When the success is gone, when the identity you built disappears, when you're left trying to figure out who you are without it. Well, today's guest has lived that story at the highest level. Leigh Steinberg is one of the most iconic sports agents of all time, representing Hall of Fame athletes, building a career that most people only dream about. And yes, serving as the real life inspiration behind the movie Jerry Maguire. And then he lost it. Addiction took him to a place where everything he built, his business, his reputation, his relationships, was on the line. But folks, what makes his story powerful isn't just the fall, it's the comeback. His new book, The Comeback, a playbook for turning life's setbacks into victories, is about exactly that. The journey back, the work it takes to rebuild your life and what you discover about yourself along the way. This is what Rise and Grind is about, not just the success, but the resilience. Leigh, welcome to the show, my friend.
Thank you, Thurl.
Well, first of all, I'm honored. I went out to Audible a week or so ago and just fell right into your book. And I have to say, right off the top, that the forward in that book by Troy Aikman is one of the most powerful that I have ever read on any book. It really talked about the true essence of who you are based on where you were and based on where you are now. So congratulations to you on the new book. And we're going to keep this podcast really based around that, because that is really what Rise and Grind, why I started Rise and Grind, is about stories like yours. So I want to get this out of the way. First of all, being the inspiration, because most people know the movie, but they may not know the man behind it. And so being the inspiration for Jerry Maguire, how close did they actually get to who you were at that time of your life?
Well, it's really not autobiographical. It's based on stories I told Cameron Crowe, the writer-director. And he followed me around in 1993. He went to the NFL League meetings. He came to draft day where Drew Bledsoe was the first player picked. He came to the press conference. He came to the pro scouting day. He came to games. And I told him stories, lots and lots of stories. So I like the part of the movie that humanized sports agents, but I started back in 1975 when there really wasn't sports representation, and built a practice based on the athlete as role model. So I asked them all to retrace their roots to the high school community, set up a scholarship fund or Boys and Girls Club, or work with the church, go to the campus and set up something that bonds you with the alums, and then set up a charitable foundation based on some cause. So that part of it gets into that mission statement in the movie. And, here we are, 64 first round draft picks and the very first pick in the drafts 8 times and 12 players in the Hall of Fame, a lot of baseball, basketball. So I think it was reflective of the world And large parts of it seem to be based on stories I told them.
Well, let's do this. Let's go back to the beginning. So, at your peak, Leigh, what what does success mean to you at the top of your game?
I was always about impact, and my dad had two core values. One was treasure relationships, especially family, and the second was making a meaningful difference in the world, healing pain, and helping people who couldn't help themselves. So I was always guided that way. It was never the economics, it was always could you mentor young men? Could you stimulate the best in them, and together could you make a difference in the society? So the $1.3 billion they've raised for charity, that to me is success. And being a good father and a good friend, that's success. The outward uh, vesting of it is never was my motivation.
So, how much of your identity at that time was tied to being Leigh Steinberg, the agent?
I always knew internally that newspaper clippings would fade, that uh, fame would fade, that at the end of life you'd be left with, if you had a spiritual relationship with a higher power, if you were a good father, a good friend to people who need friends, and if you looked out for other people, and that really was my identity.
Did you ever feel like that at that point, at some point early in your career, you had arrived?
The very first player I represented was Steve Bartkowski in 1975, and he was the first pick overall in the drafts, and we got the largest rookie contract in NFL history. So, and we went back, and I was stunned at the fact they had big lights in the sky at the Atlanta airport. They had a crowd pressed up against a police line, and I thought, oh my God, we're not in Berkeley anymore.
That's awesome. Um, so let's get to the next part of your journey. When did you feel like things started to slip internally for you?
There was a time in my late 50s where my two sons were diagnosed with retinitis pigmentosa, which meant they were legally blind, and I felt powerless to protect them. My father died a long death of esophageal cancer, and I felt frustrated in helping him. And we had a beachside city in Newport Beach where it got high levels of mold in it, which is toxic, and so
Mhm.
we had knock that house to the ground. I felt like I was failing. I was powerless. I couldn't protect my kids from going blind. It was grandiose, Thurl, to think I could, but the coalescence of all those things made me feel helpless. And I turned to the wrong thing. I turned to alcohol to sort of blot out the reality.
In your book, there's a moment I read about where you're laying on your father's bed, and chronologically, this may have been during some of those times you just spoke about. But was there a moment, a particular moment, that you knew that something wasn't right?
Yes, I had to break denial. And because alcohol and addiction tell you you don't have a problem, the world that keeps challenging you to stop has the problem.
Mm.
And so it was necessary for me to confront the fact that my brain had been rewired and it was no longer volitional to drink. It was the cravings were overwhelming. And so uh, I finally got to the point where I'd shut down my condo, I'd shut down my business and given it to the other players. And I'm back at my parents' house at 61 years old. And I'm sitting there thinking, you know what? I've lost any sense of proportionality. because I'm not a starving peasant in Sudan.
Mm.
I'm not, I don't have the last name Steinberg in Nazi Germany. Nothing's wrong with me health wise except whatever alcohol's done. And what excuse do I have not to live up to those two core values of treasuring relationships and making a difference in the world? Um, and I saw some light at the end of the tunnel. I saw that I could escape this. And so I turned to a 12-step program with a unique fellowship and worked the 12 steps, went into sober living and said, if nothing else in this world, if I never re-enter the world of work, um, I will be sober and I will be a good father. And that really was my comeback, maintaining sobriety for the last 16 years.
Well, you were very honest and open about it in your new book, The Comeback. Let me ask you though, Leigh, what did rock bottom look like for you?
Rock bottom was sitting on my deceased father's bed
Mm.
in my family home at an elevated age, um, having no practice, having no place to live, um, yeah, being economically challenged, and being alienated for one of my kids. The other two hung in there. And that was as bad as it got, but it was bad enough.
Well, that was my next question. I was going to ask you, what did you lose during that time? And I think you just really answered that question.
My practice, my condo, basically, I was down to sitting on a park bench in West Los Angeles, drinking out of a paper bag.
So there had to be a moment. Maybe it was something, a conversation you had with yourself or someone had with you that this had to change. How did that
So
come about?
my brother Jim came and took me to sober living, and I lived in a house with about 10 other gentlemen, and I lived there from March of 2010 to about December of 2010, and in that time, put together a set of tools that could accelerate my recovery, and went to a load of meetings, got a sponsor, worked the 12 steps, put sobriety first above everything, and focused on that.
That feels like that was the day to day progress for you. And I'm sure that was, I mean, that's a hard place to come back from for anybody. But what was harder? Was it building success the first time or rebuilding it?
Rebuilding it, because the first time I just fortuitously started at the top with the
Mm.
first chick in the draft. But I knew as I would come back that I had to be prepared. So first of all, I waited 3 years
Okay.
and made sure that I had a solid foundation in sobriety. Um, and then there were a number of people who were willing to fund me to go back into the representation business. But I needed to be brutally honest with myself about the fact that I'd face questions like from parents and younger players, how can you guarantee you'll stay sober? Which you can't.
Right.
You've been out of it for 5 or 6 years. You still have contacts and connections. You didn't do a very good job managing your own money. How can you manage ours? Well, we don't. We have financial planners who do that. But I didn't have a divine right to represent athletes. They come to you because they have needs that you can potentially fulfill. And so in 2016, I represented a first round quarterback, Paxton Lynch. And that was sort of a signal that quarterback had been my heavy position. There were times in the 90s where I represented half the starting quarterback. So that got things going. And then the next year, Patrick Mahomes came into the league. And by his second year was MVP of the league. And so so that got all rebuilt. At the same time, we continued to do agent academies to teach a younger generation of sports professionals how to um, uh, aggregate the skills needed to be a success, how to recruit, how to negotiate, how to set up a charitable foundation, and uh, and I continued my work on concussion, which is head injury, is inherent in all collision sports. And I had a crisis of conscience back in the 80s because I kept representing players who got concussions and hit in the head. And we would go to doctors and ask how many is too many, and they had no answers.
Mm.
So I continued to work in all those fields and put together a practice that was based on fundamental values, sense of self-respect, spiritual values, living in a family where people care for each other. And I tried to profile athletes that were interested in retracing their roots and were self-starters.
So your book gets into the subject of accountability and redefinition. Um, how important was it for you to take full responsibility of where you were at that point in your career?
It's like, what lifetime would I be waiting for
Mm.
to understand that the reason I got drunk was had nothing to do with external people, situations, or anything. It was my responsibility um, to to behave in sober and mature fashion, and I needed to take ownership over every negative thing that had happened. And then I made a decision to be public about my recovery. So I always post 16 years on the sunny side of the street because I wanted to be helpful to other people who are struggling and out there in darkness and despondency. And I thought, well, if my story can help them. And that was the motivation for writing the book. If it inspires one person to have a quicker, more fundamental recovery from whatever ails them. It could be financial uh, collapse. It could be medical. It could be marital or relationship, or it could be, as in my case, substances.
Mm.
But life will invariably and inevitably set us back at some point. And the question is, how do you respond to it? Can you be resilient? Can you put together an intelligent game plan? Can you find a relationship with a higher power that can help you with it?
Well, I think I know the answer to this question, but I wanted to hear it from you. What matters more now, success or significance?
Significance, impact always mattered more to me. It's, can I use my practice to help athletes push back publicly against racism and domestic violence and bullying and the environment? And can we together make a difference? And with the athletes, can I help them on their health and wellness? Can I help them plan a second career? Can I deal with them holistically? The most important skill I think in life, Thurl, is listening. It's drawing out another human being, cutting below surface responses to understand someone else's deepest anxieties and fears and their greatest hopes and dreams. And if you can put yourself into the heart and mind of another human being and see the world the way they see it, you can gracefully navigate your way through all life's challenges.
In your book, you talk about 9 pillars. Um, touch on some of those So, they're all important, but touch on some that our listeners who are obviously everyone is going through something. Talk about some of those pillars and the importance.
So I
There.
think first thing is to be introspective and to understand exactly what your own goals and priorities are. Is it short term economic gain? Is it long term economic security? Is it spiritual? Is it family, geography, profile, making a difference in the world, the corner office, and to have the clearest sense of where you are at this specific time. And those things change over time, and those priorities may adjust. So you need to do a brutal inventory. Then you need to break denial about what your situation is and to honestly face it. Then you need to have resilience, the ability to come back, and vision, the ability to, and then you need to set up a routine that you follow that leads you in a positive direction.
Well, when we come back, um, we will continue our conversation with Leigh Steinberg and talk a little bit more about his book, The Comeback. So stay with us. We'll be right back with Rise and Grind. Hey guys, time out. You know, you give your best to your work, your family, and your responsibilities. But to keep showing up strong, you've got to stay dialed in. At Game Day Men's Health, the nation's leading men's clinic, they help you get back in the game with a custom game plan built around your labs, your goals, and your performance. Testosterone, peptides, real optimization. Come in today for a free testosterone test and consult. Tell them Big T sent you, and you get 50% off your first year membership. GameDayMen'sHealth.com. Victory starts within. Welcome back to Rise and Grind. We are talking today in this episode to Leigh Steinberg, one of the foremost agents of our generation. His new book, The Comeback, a playbook for turning life's setbacks into victories. He is forthcoming and open about having everything, having built his businesses and losing it all through addiction, but getting it all back and then more. Leigh, what would you say to someone, and I'm sure they're listening to this, what would you say to someone who is stuck right now in their life? And it could be addiction, it could be other things. I think you've touched on a little bit of this as well. But you're talking to that person sitting in front of you. What would you say to them?
Well, I first understand what their goals are in life. In other words, what represents fulfillment and success to them. So you have a clear picture. And many times people are not really self aware and get confused. And so I'd like to have clarity as to what that person's ultimate goals and aspirations are. And then be honest, brutally honest in terms of confronting them. People get overwhelmed. Oh, I've got this to do, that to do, everything to do, and then they sort of shut down. And my advice is make a list of every single thing that you feel like you need to accomplish and prioritize it. And instead of looking at the whole and being overwhelmed, focus on doing the first thing first
Mm.
and then the next thing. Don't focus on the ultimate result, just focus on the steps. And I tell athletes, stay in process. Do those things in practice and preparation and performance that are necessary without obsessing on the ultimate result. Just stay in the moment and stay in process. And then let's put together a game plan that's got the best chance of getting you back. So if it's financial, let's make a list of all your debts, everything you
Mm,
own, all the pressures. And instead of having that come in as a frightening and incoherent, anxiety producing event, let's just put them down on a piece of paper and figure it out. And then step by step, figure out who can help in this. Where can you get outside assistance? Do you need therapy? Do you need addiction help? Do you need a tech? Do you need a marriage counselor? Who can be helpful in this situation? And how can we get so caught up day to day in what we're doing that it never gives time to sit back and think about the structure and whether or not it's leading you in the right direction. In other words, we handle emergencies at work, we handle whatever's, and you can go months without ever rethinking the entire structure of your life and whether or not you're headed in the right direction.
So, Leigh, you have seen the evolution of sports. You're so eclectic as an agent. You represent athletes from all backgrounds, all sports. What is one of the, or several of the biggest differences as you've seen the game change? You've seen the business change. The biggest difference from when you first started to now when you represent a player. I know some things probably, um, as it pertains to the human side of things, may be still the same, but what do you see different now in this generation of athletes in sports?
So this generation grows up on computers, video games. They take their information not from a newspaper, from something they read off their phone or off a computer screen. And so the whole way in which information is transferred is different. And it attenuates attention span. So the athlete that I used to spend an hour and a half talking to, now I get 15 minutes, maybe. Uh, so you got that. Then the economics have completely changed. The salary cap in football went up to $300 million, which reflects hundreds of millions of dollars in potential contracts. That was $200 million a couple of years ago.
Mm,
Um, Teams that made $2 million as their share of the national TV contract in 1975 now make $300 million, and you have fantasy sports and stadia with naming rights and the rest of it. And but the three biggest changes that have happened to college sports are NIL, which is the ability of a young man to or woman to do marketing from high school on. Gambling, which is now possible to place a bet at the Commander Stadium or in Chicago where the Bulls play, and is an existential threat. All it will take is one athlete to shave performance interacting with a gambler or to give inside information on what are called prop bets. And you you've got people questioning the integrity of the sport, and then it becomes wrestling. Conference realignment in college was another big shift. And this is all happening together. And the whole concept of amateurism, the whole concept of waiting until you become a pro, out the window. Now, the best quarterback in last year's draft um, committed to LSU and they guaranteed him $4 million in NILs. A Michigan alum came along and before he ever played it down at LSU, he gave him $14 million and he transferred to Michigan. So this is, if Rich Van Winkle had gone to sleep 5 years ago and awoken today, he'd be in culture shock.
yes, you would. Boy, I could have used that in '83 when we won the national championship at NC State. under Jimmy V, but you know, we did get a ring out of it.
If you had if you had said you were contemplating coming out earlier, staying in school, they'd offer you $10 million.
That's right. So with that though, Leigh, you talk about the evolution of sports and the business side, and your book really talks about your evolution, your journey. Have you had to change the way you do business? Have you had to, there's certain things I would guess about you that you would still use that you used in the past, but how have you had to, as a person, change or not change according to what's happening in the sports world?
So I'm not sure I would have done this career if NIL had been around
Mm,
52 years ago. Um, because it takes a sophisticated family and a player to agree to work with an agent who requires of them that they retrace their roots in their own time, in their own way, who talks about health and safety and breaks the denial that athletes have over their physical health, where they think they'll live forever and will play under every circumstance. So now, instead of being 21 or 22, that athlete is making his representation decision at 16 or
right.
17. And so that's way too early in the process for me to be excited about representing an athlete. So, um, you know, I still have about 15 football players that I represent, but in terms of seeking out new ones, I'm not sure about that.
And obviously, you have a criteria for who you will represent. How do you go through that selection process?
Research.
Mm,
You search. If I can find that this young man went to a mission to Haiti, that he works with inner city kids. If I can read an interview where he's articulate and grounded, if I can see that he comes from a family, even if it's not two parents, that is nurturing, and you try to research those things. What I'm looking for in athletic performance is this: what does an athlete do in adversity?
mm,
And you've you're shooting 25% and the game's getting out of hand. You're throwing three interceptions and the crowd is booing, the center's looking at you like you're on hallucinogens, the game is getting away. What do you do now? In critical game situations, can you compartmentalize, adopt the quiet mind, wipe out memory wise the reverses that have happened, and elevate your level of play in critical situations to take a team to and through victory? You look for that quality because it's easy to perform when things are going well. It's tougher when you're struggling.
well, you look for those qualities, Leigh, because you've lived it.
So
Listening to your story, this really is exactly why I do this show, because success is great, but resilience is everything. And anybody can celebrate, as you just mentioned, when you're winning. But when things fall apart, when you're at your lowest, that's when you find out who you really are. Most importantly, whether you're willing to put the work in to come back. And so your story is a reminder that it's never too late to rebuild. It's never too late to take ownership, to change directions, to fight your way back to purpose. And for anybody listening right now who feels like they're in that pit, you're not done. And so, Leigh, I really appreciate your honesty, your vulnerability, and the example that you're setting. Where can people find the comeback and stay connected with you?
well, if not at a bookstore, you can certainly find it on Barnes and Noble or Amazon.com. And there's a audiobook too,
Oh
which
yeah.
this squeaky voice didn't read, but for James Earl Jones or Morgan Freeman. uh, but they weren't available. But anyway, it's a good here, and then you can find us at steinbergspeaks.com.
Lee, you're incredible, my man. I had an opportunity years and years and years ago to meet you at an event.
Beating the odds.
Yes, it sure was. And I, w- I was fanboying. They didn't have that word back then, but I, kn- I knew who you were, and it's just an honor to meet you. And you were at the top of your game then, but I'm really glad I've had the opportunity to catch up. You came through Salt Lake City a few years ago, and we got reconnected. But I'm truly honored. I know our listeners will be edified. And so thank you so much for sharing here on Rise and Grind, and the best of everything to you, and God bless you.
Thank you, and good luck with Rise You Grind.
Thank you, Leigh. Thank you guys for listening to this episode of Rise and Grind. We hope that you go on and like the series, or give us your comments about what you thought. We welcome them. If you're facing struggles, hopefully you've learned, don't try to do it alone. So thank you for joining and watching Rise and Grind, and we'll see you next time.